Today's devotion is How Do Chaplains Pray? Well, actually, we chaplains pray the same way that every true Christian ought to be praying anyway, really. But what should that look like according to Scripture? The first thing to know about powerful and effective prayer is this: it is not about convincing God to do what we want. Prayer is not about trying to convince God to give us what we want. First and foremost, effective prayer is about being aligned with His will. It is about what God wants. It's about what God desires for our work, for our ministry, for our growth, and our lives. So the question then becomes, do we trust God? Do we trust Him enough to have joy even through this trial that we call life, even when it seems that our desires, our wishes, our hopes, our dreams are somehow being rejected or ignored by God when we're praying so fervently for Him to give us something that we want, that maybe He, in His ultimate wisdom, does not want for us? So His answers are sometimes no, sometimes they're not yet. And maybe it's because we're asking for something that He knows is not right for us. There are many scriptures that illustrate the importance of alignment with God first, so that our prayers will be answered. But perhaps the most obvious one is found in John chapter 14, verses 13 through 15, but most people stop at verse 14. John 14, 13 to 15 is where Jesus said, and I quote, verse 13, "Whatever you ask in my name, that will I do, so that the Father may be glorified in the Son." Verse 14, if, that's the biggest word in the Bible right there, that word if you ask me anything in my name, I will do it. Most people stop there and ignore verse 15. If you love me, you will keep my commandments. So in context, asking in His name is tied to truly loving Him, as demonstrated by doing what He says. You see, that word, or three words, in my name, which appears twice, results in Jesus saying, I will do it. And this is so much more than the habit of some of us who use in Jesus' name as a sort of magic set of words in the hope that by just invoking His name, we're going to get what we want. To be in Jesus and praying truly in His name implies that we have become so aligned with Him that our desires are being based on His desires. What we want is based on what He wants. This is made clear in verse 15, which closes out the section saying, if you love me, then you will keep my commandments. In other words, our true life-changing love for Jesus is represented by a commitment to living for Him, doing what He says, living the way He teaches, wanting what He wants, obeying Him completely in the everyday stuff of life. Essentially, what the praying person does then is to align his or her will, desires, wishes, and wants to the very will of God, so that we are learning to not only want the same things that He wants for us, but we're learning to ask Him for what He is already predisposed to give us. And when we ask for what He already wants, when our desires are for those very same things, then we are absolutely guaranteed to have a powerful prayer life that always gets a yes from Jesus for anything that we ask in His name, because our desires are in line with obedience to His will, and we're asking Him for what He wants to do anyway. Paul gives us a word picture about effective prayer in Philippians chapter 4, verses 6 through 7. Verse 6, he says, be anxious for nothing, But in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And verse 7, the peace of God, which surpasses all comprehension, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. So first, do you trust God enough during your trials and storms? Do you want what he wants for your life, or do you want something else? And here, Paul uses 3 words to teach us how to let our requests be made known to God, so that his peace will guard our hearts and our minds in Christ Jesus, even during terrible trial. Those 3 words that Paul used to describe how to make a request of God are the words prayer, supplication, and thanksgiving. Prayer, from the Greek word proseuche, it means literally a conscious, purposed conversation with God from within a place of prayer that implies a focusing of our thoughts directed only at God and our minds not wandering or thinking about other things while we're listening for his response in quietness. And then the word supplication, from the Greek word desis, it means literally making needs, desires, and wants known both to yourself and to God. Then the question becomes, are these aligned with his will for you? Finally, he uses the words with thanksgiving, from the Greek word eucharista, means literally having a continual attitude of gratefulness in the knowledge of his great sacrifice and love for us, which is represented by the celebration of communion, where the word Eucharist holds the wine representing the blood that he shed and poured out for us. And so, let me close with this. We love God, and we learn to align our lives with his will, living in obedience to him. We are focused on having conversations with God in which we're telling him all about our hopes and our fears, our wishes and our wants, our desires and our needs, so that we can do his will, that we get what we need to live the way he wants us to live. All of this is wrapped in a profound feeling of gratitude and knowing that in Jesus, we will no longer get what we deserve, but rather we will get what Christ deserves. That, my friend, is how a chaplain prays. I'm really pleased to tell you that one of our wonderful chaplains, who I have grown very fond of and love very much, is Dr. Angella Davis. Angela holds a doctorate degree in pastoral counseling and psychotherapy, a master's in divinity, and a master's in health administration. She has completed 4 units of clinical pastoral education with us, who were teaching CPE for her, and now is a candidate for board certified chaplain. She's an ordained chaplain of Christian chaplains and coaching. Her main focus of ministry is crisis counseling, teaching intervention and prevention workshops around various topics, which include, but are not limited to, suicide, mental health, and substance abuse issues. She has a passion for working with women to strengthen their identity and self-image. She is a professional visionary leader who believes in giving back and working with spirit of excellence. So, my dear friend and fellow chaplain, welcome, Chaplain Angella Davis.
Well, while I am figuring this out, I just want to just say thank you to Jim for allowing me to do this presentation. I am one of the chaplains with Christian Chaplains and Coaching, and this topic is very dear to my heart. It's one that we don't talk enough about. And so I'm hoping that in our time together that we can kind of have some conversation. It will be a sort of a brief presentation. This presentation is usually about 2 hours, honestly. And so I'm going to give you a Cliff Note version of it. It may sound morbid, but I'm very passionate about helping people get help, especially around this topic. One of the primary factors is the stigma that's associated with people getting help. And so just being able to kind of have more conversation about this topic, I think will sort of not only bring more awareness, but sort of how to identify what the risk factors are, what the warning signs are, and what our role is, especially as chaplains, in really kind of getting people help. So let's just kind of see how we are going to do this. You guys are seeing the PowerPoint, correct?
Yeah, that works.
That works? Okay.
That works. Yep. If you want to do it that way,
All right.
that'll
So
work.
when we talk about suicide, what are we talking about? We are talking about an intentional act resulting in one's own life. So, in other words, it's sort of a voluntary sort of actions. Somebody has decided that they're not able to manage the stress that they're going through, the depression that they're experiencing, and so they have decided at this point that, they're going to sort of just check out on life. They're just going to just hurt themselves. It's a preventable loss of life. And what that means is if we can intervene early enough and understand what is going on with that person, there is a possibility that we can prevent that person from wanting to consider suicide as the only alternative. It's a common stress injury, which we'll talk a little bit about. And it's really a means to stop intense emotional pain. Studies have shown that what people have said who attempted suicide and were not successful is that they don't really want to die, but they also don't want to live. And so they don't kind of know what the options are. But this is what they want to happen. So it's a relevant issue that affects everybody. So before we kind of get into the meat of it, I just want you guys to just take a look at this particular picture. And as you can see, these are folks that most of us are pretty familiar with. When we talk about the WHO, I mean, these are celebrities. Some of them, the names you already know, right? There is Naomi Judd. There's Robin Williams. There's Don Cornelius for those of us back in the 70s and so forth. And, by all account, when you look at these people, you would think that everything is fine and wonderful. These are folks who are celebrity, who have money. It's easy to think that everything is going fine, but unless you ask the question, what is going on or what's wrong, you won't really know. I mean, suicide does not discriminate. It doesn't matter your race, doesn't matter your socioeconomic background, it doesn't matter your gender, it doesn't matter your age. The suicidal ideations can overtake a person. And that's why it's important for us to have the conversation because everybody's dealing with various stress and stressors. The truth is that most people that are hurting have like two parallel lives, right? They have the one that they want us to see, and then they have the one that they're really living and experiencing. And they are often kind of experiencing these internal despair and a sense of hopelessness, and they just feel like there's no other outlet to take. And so they end up hurting themselves. Statistically, most suicide happens in familiar places. They tend to happen at home or places where most people feel more comfortable. For a lot of our military people, it happens in the barracks. It happens, when they're off duty. It happens in the quarters. And so the reality is, we don't always know why somebody makes the choice or makes that decision. But what we can do is have more conversation and become more comfortable with the topic so that we can better understand, how it's impacting people. Okay, let's see if we can get to this. Okay. So if you kind of look at the impact, and this is kind of what we are kind of seeing. So it's a public health crisis. So 1 in every 100 deaths, especially in 2029, was a result of suicide. It's the second leading cause of death for ages 10 to 24. So as you can see, it's getting younger with some of our kids, and ages 25 to 34. Um, I know COVID, they were concerned would be a big factor in that, and we did see an uptick there, especially on our military base. I'm in Virginia Beach, and we've had a significant impact uptick where that's concerned. But it is sort of a global issue. It's a public health crisis. I have these little slides up here. You all probably can't read it, but just to sort of put this in perspective a little bit. Um, One hospital reported that in their emergency room, they had over 1,096 self-inflicted people who showed up in the ER. That is kind of more than accidents and strokes and even Alzheimer's disease. They saw an uptick. This picture here is a picture of the Citizen Bank. It's the Philly home stadium. The capacity here is 43,651. And literally, they probably had more than that of people who died in 2019 of suicide. Okay, so that's just to kind of put it in perspective a little bit, so that you can get a sense of, how significant this is. Again, this is just some more statistics about an estimated 1 million people committed suicide in 2019. Okay, that is more than war and murder and natural disaster. And I have the numbers there: self harm, heart disease, road rage, AIDS, and murder. Okay, so as you can see, this is a situation that we really need to talk more about. And we're kind of seeing it a lot more with younger people as well. Okay. Okay, so let's look at the why. Because it's natural to ask the question, okay, why are people doing this? And if for some reason, we do have somebody in our lives who has committed suicide, it's natural to ask the question, what did I miss? What could I have done differently? Um, and sometimes, there isn't anything. And I think it's important to know that. Sometimes there are no red flags. But these are some of the things that may cause somebody to consider wanting to harm themselves. So, what you're looking for is somebody who has maybe some sleep disturbances. They're not sleeping very well. Maybe they're sleeping too much, maybe they're not sleeping enough, that kind of thing. Maybe they're having persistent and vivid nightmares. I know that when we talk to some of our service members, a lot of them have experienced PTSD. And so you do see that as a common theme with some of them. Again, significant discipline issue. Maybe you're seeing that there's a change in sort of what's happening at work. They're constantly being called into the supervisor's office. There's something kind of different or that's going on. Now, these doesn't necessarily mean that these are predictors that somebody will commit suicide, but these are red flags that somebody might be at risk. And so these are just sort of some things to sort of, take a look at. Maybe there's an uptick in their substance use. Maybe they were smoking cigarettes and now you're noticing that they're smoking other things. Especially for kids, we're noticing that a lot more of them are vaping and using marijuana and things like that. They're using hardcore substances. They have a lot more rage. They easily get set off really easily. And you're noticing some maybe depression. Certainly on the far right over here, you'll see sort of another list of some things that could be a factor. Finance is a big one that we see quite a bit for a lot of people. Career instability, maybe they just recently got fired, or maybe they've moved someplace else and they haven't quite sort of connected. For our young people, we're seeing maybe some bullying and peer pressure where that is concerned. There's a sense of, hopelessness. Maybe they've recently had a divorce and are having some relationship challenges. But these are just some red flags to pay attention to when you or somebody in your life is experiencing these kind of things. And then that can lead to some suicidal and even homicidal thoughts as well. Okay. So this particular doctor, Dr. Thomas Joyner, his father committed suicide, and he did some research because, like so many of you, he wanted to know the why. Why would my dad want to take his own life? And so in his research, he identified these three particular things in his research. Now, independent of themselves, doesn't necessarily mean that this person is going to commit suicide. But what he found is that when the person feels alone, so, they just sort of feel like, nobody cares about me. Maybe, again, they've gone through recent divorce and separation. They're just having a hard time. There's sort of this intense sort of sense of isolation and loneliness that they feel. Maybe you're noticing that they seem to be more withdrawal than normal. There's a sense that, I'm a burden to somebody. Again, they don't know their worth or their value. They feel as if, somehow or another, they're constantly needing that person. And so they feel like they're a burden. And again, there's an obsession with death. They're not afraid to die. Again, when I talk to some of my service member, we hear that a lot. A lot of them, have access to guns. And so we want to make sure that we are talking about, how to make sure that we lock up those guns. Again, men are 3 times more likely to attempt, and women are about, 2 times more likely as well. And that's because men do tend to use more violent means. They will use weapons as opposed to a female who may use pills or something along those lines. But again, what he determined here is that when all three of these things are present, this person is likely at risk to harm themselves. Okay. So, the National Center for Veteran Studies says the core of the issue is that it's not that people who attempt suicide want to harm themselves as much. They simply want the pain that they're currently feeling to stop, and they don't see another way out. And this is really significant because a lot of people are in pain. They have a lot of grief, they have a lot of loss, and there's no safe place for them to talk about it. Or again, the stigma, we'll touch on that a little bit more, but the stigma prevents them from really being able to share honestly about what is really going on and what they're really feeling. And so they want to live, but at the same time they want to die. And so there's this sort of back and forth that goes on. So let's look at what the risk factors are, because I think this is sort of the important part in order to be able to recognize, how do I know when somebody is at risk? How do I know when somebody is really having a hard time? So we're looking for past history. So maybe they've had past attempts in the past. They've had some ideations. You hear them say, you know what, I just feel like I don't want to wake up. I just feel like I don't want to be here anymore. I just feel like I just want to die. I just want to give up. So those are some risk factors. Maybe they recently had somebody who committed suicide. Usually the risk increases when somebody that they know have recently committed. And then also, we're looking for people who may have a history of mental illness. Now, having a mental illness does not necessarily mean that you're suicidal. However, we have seen where people with various mental health issues do tend to be more depressed, and therefore that can lead to them having at least some suicidal ideation where that's concerned. The ongoing stressors, like some of what we talked about before. So there's relationship issues, there's work issues, there's disciplinary issues, there's financial issues. Those are some of the ongoing stressors that we're paying attention to that can take a toll on individuals and again create some ideations as well and just kind of feeling stuck or trapped with no way out. Maybe there's some disruptive social network. Again, we see that often with our military personnel because they're always deploying, they're always gone. But it could simply mean that the person has moved to a new environment and they're having a hard time just adjusting and or making friends or connecting to a church and those kind of things. So that social network that they had has been disruptive. They've moved far away from family. And so they're really having a hard time with that. Judgment factors, not getting enough sleep. Maybe, work is just taking its toll on them as well. And so we're kind of seeing that as an issue. And then presence of warning signs, and we'll touch on that a little bit. And then access to and knowledge of lethal means. 60% of suicide happen by firearms. And so it's important that if we are aware that somebody has these risk factors and we know that they have access to some type of lethal means, that we are trying to find a way to help them sort of lock that up so that they can't easily get access to it. Suicide is an impulsive decision. Again, like I said, most people don't want to die. And so when they are impulsive in that moment and they have access, they will tend to kind of go and get that weapon, and that's a deadly combination when you have those two together. Okay. So this is an acronym that I like to use, and there are quite a bit of them that are out there, but I think this one sort of helps to sort of understand better what it is that we're looking at. So it's called Is Path Warm? Some of you may have heard of it before. So we're talking about the ideation, thoughts of wanting to die. We're talking about an uptick in their substance use. Maybe they went from drinking one beer to now they're drinking six packs and things like that. They're using more hardcore drugs to just sort of numb the pain or mask what's going on. There's a sense of, purposelessness, no reason to live, no sense of meaning. They're anxious. Anxious about life, anxious about things, all those kind of things. And maybe there's a sense that they just feel stuck. There's no way out of their situation. They just feel like, there is just no hope. And then again, the sense of hopelessness, right? There's nothing that I want to live for. I don't have a sense of what the future needs to look like for me. Then, of course, there's the withdrawals that we touched on a little bit, where, this was somebody who may have been the life of the party, who didn't mind going out to dinner and calling you and texting you, but you're noticing that their activities with friends and families has kind of decreased a little bit. And so they're more withdrawn, they're more isolated than they would typically be. Maybe they're sleeping more. Um, Maybe you're noticing a lot more rage with that person, or maybe they're seeking revenge. They're really angry with somebody or angry with themselves, and they're trying to find ways to get back at that person. And so there's a lot of rage that comes with that. And then more risky behavior. I had a friend who um, subsequently killed himself. But prior to that, we did notice risky behavior. So he would be driving and he would just weave in and out of traffic. He just wouldn't follow the rules anymore. And, admittedly, we were kind of uncomfortable riding with him and agreed that, we're not going to ride with you. It just never occurred to us in that moment that maybe he was trying to take his life. And then, of course, mood changes. They're just unstable. Maybe they're up and down, things along those lines. And so, is path warm is sort of a really good way to be able to identify again, is this person at risk? So, we want to kind of make sure that we're asking and we're treating and we are caring. Okay. So, what does that look like? So, in terms of intervention, you want to ask the question, I've kind of noticed ABCXYZ, whatever that looks like. So I've kind of noticed you just seemed more agitated lately. I've kind of noticed that, you just seem more withdrawn and I'm concerned. Are you thinking about suicide? I have to tell you that, for a long time, there was this sort of sense that if you introduce the idea of suicide, that somehow or another that would make the person want to kill themselves. And that is so far from the truth. A lot of people are uncomfortable with the topic because it's just one of those uncomfortable conversations to have. But if the person has ideations, they've been thinking about this for a while. Okay, so don't be afraid to ask the question. And what I would say is if you are one of those individuals who you're just not comfortable talking about it or asking the question, find somebody else who can. So you want to just kind of come out and just ask what's bothering you. Just be clear and direct and ask them, are you thinking of suicide? Then you definitely want to demonstrate that you care, right? So you want to listen. And that's what we do as chaplains, right? We offer hope. We don't judge. Being a good listener can go a long way. And we know that as chaplain in this field. And so you definitely want to, make sure that you're there, you're listening, and you show that you care. Okay. Just letting them know that they're not alone and that their problems, can be solved with hope. And then you want to treat, okay? You want to take action, you want to get assistance, and you want to follow up. But under no circumstances should you ever leave that person alone. Make sure they come with you, make sure you call somebody else, but you never want to leave that person alone. Even if you're unsure whether or not they are suicidal, it's real important that you show that you care by continuing to be there with them. Always take the threat seriously and never hold on to secrets. So if the person says to you, I've been having these thoughts, I just don't want my family to know, I don't want anybody to know, it's important for you to let them know, listen, I care enough about you and I cannot keep this secret. I need to let somebody else know. I need to get you some help. Okay. But always take the threat seriously. Okay, so let's talk about the don'ts, because I think a lot of times, because we don't really talk enough about this, we don't always know what to say. We're uncomfortable. So, what I would say is don't try to diagnose. Sometimes, as professionals, based on our backgrounds, based on this wonderful internet that we have access to, we feel like, oh, I know what's going on with you. You have this, you have that, this is that. But again, unless you really know that person intimately and personally, and even then, they won't always tell you everything. Try not to diagnose them unless you are a doctor trained in that field. Allow somebody else to do the diagnosis. Okay. Don't give advice. And what I mean by that is stay away from the quick fixes. You tried ABC, XYZ, or I've tried XYZ and that has worked. Again, stay away from quick fixes and just listen. Allow that person a safe place to really be able to talk about what's going on. It's real important that we don't become judgmental or angry with the person. It's easy to become critical. It's easy to challenge and question, why are you thinking like this? What's wrong with you? That kind of thing. Or it's easy to become angry that they're even thinking like this. And so, again, we want to be a calm and present, and we don't want to be judgmental or angry with that person. We don't want to make jokes or be sarcastic. We don't want to trivialize another person's experience. Okay. Sometimes, because it's an uncomfortable topic, we may laugh it off, right? We may just say, stop talking like that. Or what are you thinking about killing yourself? Those kind of things. Or you know what? If you're going to kill yourself, go ahead. I'm going to just let you do it. Or I'm going to give you a gun or something like that. I've heard people say things like that. And again, that shuts the person down. It validates that they are not important. It validates, see, I told you I'm a burden. And so we definitely don't want to do that. And we don't want to give false promises. We're not God. We don't have a crystal ball. We don't have a magic wand. We can't predict what is going to happen in that person's life or if things are going to really turn around the way at least they are hoping and expecting for it to turn around. And so we want to kind of be careful about providing false promises, again, using reverse psychology, but we definitely do not want to ignore the risk. We don't want to ignore the risk. Trust what you feel, trust your instincts, and get the person some help. As you know, these are some things, I won't go through it in detail, that really can be helpful to individual eating healthy, sleeping, having a good sense of humor, staying connected. We're talking about just resiliency, the ability to sort of recover or bounce back. And we have found that, when people implement these things, and we're talking about holistically, right? So we're talking about, being physically fit, spiritually fit, mentally fit, psychologically fit. These things can really sort of help a person to literally be resilient. We live in a culture where we're expected to perform, right? Not just personally, but professionally. And when you're not doing that, for a lot of people, they can feel somewhat inadequate. They can feel like they're not up to par. And so we know that if these things are an important part of their daily life, they tend to sort of be a little bit more resilient in being able to kind of find something to hope for. These are some helpful resources that are available out there. Of course, everybody's aware of calling 911 if somebody is in trouble. You want to call a non-emergency number and let them know that you have somebody who has some ideations or has expressed that they're wanting to hurt themselves. 988 is a newer number to call. It took the place of the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. And you can text this number, you can call the number, and you can chat, and you can just let them know, hey, I've got somebody who is wanting to commit suicide, and they'll be able to provide you a list of resources that are in the community that you are in. And so this is an easy number instead of that dialing that long 1-800 number that they had before. And of course, any type of mental health professional or trained counselor, and that includes clergy, because a lot of our clergy are trained in this area as well. And so you want to make sure when you come in contact with that individual that they are with you, and it's a nice warm handoff to the individual who is going to be treating them and working with them. Okay. So, suicide is a global people issue that affects all of us, either directly or indirectly. It's the underlying issue. The underlying issue may be complex, but basic prevention intervention is not. Intervention focuses on connection and validation. Prevention focuses on daily care and connection, education, and problem solving. There is always someone available to assist in these efforts. So the goal is not for you to, basically prevent this person from hurting themselves. The goal is not for you to talk them out of it. The goal is really to just be there and show that you care. Okay. And walk with them through whatever the pain, whatever the feelings, whatever the frustration is, that sense of hopelessness that they have, and connect them to somebody else who can basically be able to provide support. It is a spiritual issue, but for some people, they do need medication. And we want to make sure that regardless of how we feel, what we believe, that we get them to the proper individuals to be able to help them. During sort of our short little abbreviated presentation, it's estimated that there have been 5 suicides already. Okay, so this is a significant issue. And then lastly, this slide I will share, human understanding is the most effective weapon against suicide. The greatest need is to deepen the awareness and sensitivity of people to their fellow human beings. And that quote came from the American Association of Suicidology Foundation, and that was from the president. So that is our abbreviated version of suicide, just sort of being more aware of what's going on and what to do and what some of the risk factors are. So thanks for listening.